The flat, if one could call it that, perched precariously on the second floor of a crumbling Victorian terraced house in Bethnal Green. Benji Eggles, 28, surveyed his kingdom, a single-room studio, kitchen, diner, bedroom, bathroom all in one, where a faint, persistent damp patch on the ceiling resembled a map of forgotten continents. The stench of stale chips and desperation lingered like a bad fog. Benji, a man whose natural pallor was often enhanced by a delicate shade of gray, was currently attempting to prise a fiver from the sofa cushions, a task requiring the dexterity of a bomb disposal expert and the patience of a saint. "Come on, you bastard," he muttered, his fingers wriggling into the abyss. "Just one more hit of glorious, mind-numbing oblivion. That's all I ask." He was abruptly interrupted by a frantic knocking, followed by a thumping that suggested someone was trying to dismantle his front door with their forehead. Benji froze, instinctively clutching a half-eaten Greggs sausage roll to his chest like a priceless artifact. Landlord? Police? Most likely. Barry from number 7, still convinced Benji owed him for a bag of premium oregano. "Go away," Benji yelled, his voice cracking slightly. He flattened himself against the wall, trying to appear less at home. The knocking intensified, accompanied now by a distinctly American accent, laced with an urgent, almost melodramatic plea. "Open up, please. He's gonna kill me," Benji sighed. Another one. His flat, despite its aesthetic shortcomings, seemed to attract a certain clientele of the desperate and deranged. "Look, love, I haven't got any change, and I'm not interested in whatever pyramid scheme you're selling, unless it involves pure, uncut happiness. I'm not selling anything, you ignorant limey." I'm being chased by a very angry man with very large hands and a very small temper. Just as Benji was about to deliver a particularly eloquent expletive through the door, the sound of heavy footsteps pounded up the communal stairs. A man's voice, thick with rage, bellowed from the hallway. "Trix, you get back here, you thieving little tart!" Panic flared in Benji's chest. Thieving? This was getting above his pay grade. He heard a desperate scuffle, a frustrated grunt, and then, with a thunderous crash that felt less like a knock and more like a battering ram, his front door flew inwards, splintering a piece of the frame. Standing in the gaping doorway, panting and wild-eyed, was a woman who looked like a discarded Christmas fairy. Her blonde hair, matted in places, fell around a face that, even smudged with grime, held a certain defiant beauty. She was wearing a sequined crop top that seemed to have lost a fight with a badger, and impossibly short denim shorts that barely covered the essentials. Her eyes, wide and blue, darted around the squalid room before settling on Benji. "You're Benji, right?" she gasped, not waiting for an answer. "Great, I'm Trix, and I'm your new flatmate." Benji stared, his mouth agape, a small piece of sausage roll falling from his lips. My what now?" Before he could process this assault on his already fragile reality, the angry man from the hallway appeared, filling the doorway with his bulk. He was a mountain of muscle, adorned with tattoos that looked like they'd been drawn by a deranged toddler. "There you are, you little tramp," he roared, lunging forward. Trix, with surprising agility for someone who looked like she'd just wrestled a flock of pigeons, sidestepped him, ducking behind Benji as if he were a particularly sturdy piece of furniture. "He's my flatmate, Greg. You can't just barge into my new home. That's like a total invasion of privacy." Greg halted, momentarily thrown by the sudden claim. He looked from Trix, clutching Benji's arm like a life raft, to Benji, whose face was a canvas of bewildered horror. "Flatmate," he snarled, his eyes narrowing. "Since when do you have flatmates, Trixie?" And with him he gestured dismissively at Benji, as if he were a particularly unappetizing mushroom. "Since 5 seconds ago," Trix declared, squeezing Benji's arm tighter. "We're, like, totally platonic cohabitors. Look, he's even got a sausage roll for me." She snatched the remaining half from Benji's hand and took a defiant bite. Greg blinked, his brain clearly struggling to compute this nonsensical tableau. "Right," he muttered, shaking his head. "Just tell me where the hell my wallet is, you little sneak, and I'll leave your platonic cohabitor alone." Trix swallowed the sausage roll, her eyes wide and innocent. "Wallet? Oh, Greg, I wouldn't know anything about a wallet. Unless, was it full of, like, really small, expensive diamonds? Because then, maybe I might have accidentally sat on it. Greg let out a frustrated growl that vibrated the floorboards. He knew he was being played. He glared at Benji, who felt the sudden urge to spontaneously combust. This isn't over, Trixie, he spat, then stomped away, his heavy footsteps retreating down the stairs. Silence descended, broken only by the sound of Trix chewing contentedly. Benji slowly turned his head to face her, his gaze finally settling on the splintered remains of his front door. You owe me a door, he said, his voice flat. Trix shrugged, wiping a crumb from her lip. Consider it rent. Besides, now it's got, like, a really cool distressed aesthetic. Very trendy. She gestured around the room. So, this is it? Cozy. Bit. Lived in. Benji slumped against the wall, sliding slowly to the floor. I'm Benji. And you're not my flatmate. You're a deluded American lunatic who just destroyed my last line of defense against the outside world. Trix knelt beside him, her face surprisingly earnest. Look, Benji, I need a place to crash. Just for a bit. And you clearly need, well, a lot of things. But also, like, a new perspective. We can help each other. I'm excellent at networking. And you seem to have a lot of unique local contacts. She winked. Benji stared at her, then at the hole where his door used to be, then at the sausage roll crumbs on his chest. His brain, already addled by various substances, struggled to process this new reality. A sex-addicted American prostitute, who had just made him an unwitting accomplice in what was clearly some form of larceny, was now propositioning him for cohabitation. He was British. He liked quiet. He liked routine. He liked his drugs and his solitude. He was meant to be sexless. This woman was a walking, talking, sequined affront to everything he held dear. No, Benji said, weakly. Absolutely not. Trix smiled, a predatory gleam in her eye. Too late, sugar tits, I've already unpacked. She gestured to a surprisingly large, glittery suitcase that had somehow materialized in the corner of the room. Benji closed his eyes. His life, already a gentle spiral into oblivion, had just taken the sharp, unexpected dive into a chaotic sequined abyss. Life with Trix was, Benji quickly discovered, less like a gentle cohabitation and more like living in a particularly aggressive wind tunnel. The flat, already a biohazard, now teemed with the residue of Trix's existence. Glitter, empty takeaway containers, usually not from Greg's, and the faint, unsettling scent of cheap perfume mixed with something earthy and unidentifiable. Their fights started small, like tiny, irritating gnats. You used my last teabag, Benji screeched one Tuesday morning, clutching a wilting, damp bag like a murder weapon. Do you know how precious these are? They are like gold dust. The only thing keeping me from a full-blown existential crisis before noon. Trix, expertly applying a full face of makeup in the cracked mirror despite the appalling light, shrugged. Oh, was that yours? My bad. I just assumed it was, like, a communal teabag. You know, for the flat. There is nothing communal in this flat. Especially not my personal tea supplies. This isn't some hippie commune. Trix. This is a drug den with aspirations of being condemned another time. It was the remote. Where's the remote? Benji demanded, doing a frantic, crab-like dance around the room. I was halfway through a documentary about rare British slugs. Trix, sprawled on the sofa in a negligee she'd presumably acquired from a client, yawned. Oh, I think it's under the cushions. Or maybe I threw it at that spider. He looked like he was plotting something. You threw the remote at a spider? It was a big spider, Benji. Like, a really big spider. I thought it might have rabies. And then there were Trix's appointments. Benji would often wake up to the sound of hushed voices, or sometimes, less hushed groans, emanating from the corner Trix had designated her bedroom. A mattress on the floor, surrounded by discarded clothes and a surprising number of furry handcuffs. He'd invariably find himself trapped in the main living space, pretending to be asleep or attempting to look intensely busy staring at the damp patch on the ceiling, until the client was gone. Honestly, Trix, do you have to do it in here? He'd whisper shout later, once the coast was clear. It's my living room. I'm trying to cultivate an atmosphere of quiet despair. Trix would just beam, counting a handful of crumpled notes. Cash flow, Benji. Cash flow. And besides, it's not like you're using this space for anything exciting. Are you still trying to sell those vintage toaster parts on eBay? Benji's schemes, as Trix so derisively called them, were another source of friction. His latest venture involved convincing unsuspecting tourists that the pigeon droppings on the monument in Trafalgar Square were, in fact, ancient petrified philosopher's stones with healing properties. They're not even from Trafalgar Square, Benji Trix had scoffed, watching him meticulously bag up a fresh batch from their own window ledge. That's just regular pigeon crap from Bethnal Green. You're going to get someone sick. Details. It's about the narrative, Trix. The placebo effect. Besides, I need the cash for necessities. He eyed a small baggie tucked under a loose floorboard. Necessities? Huh? Like that 5-day-old pizza crust you're sniffing? It has sentimental value. Their squabbles escalated, often ending with a dramatic flounce from Trix or a defeated sigh from Benji, who would then retreat to his corner, muttering about the sanctity of personal space and the general decline of Western civilization. One evening, Benji was attempting to assemble a rudimentary still from a series of old copper pipes and a discarded kettle, hoping to distill his own brand of artisanal vodka. The flat smelled faintly of industrial cleaner and existential dread. What in God's name is that smell? Trix exclaimed, wafting her hand dramatically in front of her nose as she entered, freshly showered and looking surprisingly glamorous. She was dressed in a slinky black dress that seemed to have been painted on. Artisanal spirits, Benji announced proudly, wiping a smear of grease from his cheek. It's a niche market. Think of it, Trix. Bethnal Green's best. Small batch, big dreams. The hipsters will lap it up or go blind, Trix muttered, picking at a loose sequin on her dress. Anyway, I'm heading out. Don't, burn the place down while I'm gone. I have a very important networking event, Benji grunted, concentrating on a particularly stubborn connection. Just don't bring anyone back who leaves their underwear on the ceiling fan again. It's a nightmare to get off. Trix chuckled. No promises, Benji. You know what they say, where there's a will, there's a way. And where there's a flatmate, there's a new opportunity for chaos. She blew him a kiss and strutted out, leaving Benji surrounded by his pipes, the smell of questionable alcohol, and the unsettling quiet that only truly descended when Trix was gone. He missed the chaos almost immediately. The smell of burnt toast hung heavy in the air, a familiar aroma that usually signified Benji's breakfast. This morning, however, it was accompanied by the less familiar scent of police-issue fabric conditioner. Benji was mid-scheme, meticulously gluing glitter onto a genuinely awful painting of a dog playing poker, which he planned to flog as contemporary folk art at a local market. Trix was stretched out on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, occasionally snorting with laughter. A loud, insistent knock rattled the already unstable frame of the newish, but still damaged, front door. Benji froze, his hand hovering over the dog's left eye. Don't move, he hissed at Trix. Don't breathe. Don't even think about paying your rent. Trix raised an eyebrow. Is that your landlord? Because I swear, if he tries to charge us for that distressed aesthetic door, it's not the landlord. Benji whispered, his eyes wide. It's the fuzz. Copper. Old Bill. The Rozzers. How do you know? Because, Benji said, pointing a trembling finger. Mick from down the road, who only ever wears a string vest and shouts at pigeons, just ran past with a pair of handcuffs dangling from his ear. The knocking intensified. A stern, official voice boomed through the door. Police. Open up. Benji looked around frantically. Where to hide the evidence? The pigeon philosopher's stones? The fake vintage teapots? The half-finished batch of artisanal vodka? His stash of unidentifiable pills? He ended up kicking a bin bag full of questionable items under the sofa with his foot. Trix, meanwhile, had calmly put down her phone and smoothed her hair. Right, she said, a mischievous glint in her eye. Operation Innocent flatmates is a go. You let me do the talking, Benji. My accent is way more trustworthy than your, whatever that is. Benji could only nod, his heart thumping like a drum solo. The door creaked open to reveal two uniformed police officers. One, a burly man with a tired expression, was clearly in charge. The other, a young woman, looked vaguely disgusted by the general state of the flat. Morning, the burly officer said, his gaze sweeping over the chaos. Benji Eggles. Benji managed a squeak. That depends. Are you selling Girl Scout cookies? The officer sighed. We're here regarding some irregularities. Information suggests you might be involved in the distribution of controlled substances from this address. Benji's face went even paler. Trix, however, stepped forward, a picture of polite concern. "Oh, officers, there must be some mistake," she purred, her Californian accent thick and sweet. "Benji, drugs? No way. He's, like, super anti-drugs. He's totally into wellness and, like, herbal teas. He's practically a monk." Benji stared at her, utterly flabbergasted. Monk? Herbal teas? He'd mainlined a half-eaten kebab for breakfast. The burly officer looked at Trix, then back at Benji's drawn face and trembling hands. "A monk, is he?" With those pupils Trix giggled. "Oh, that's just his artistic intensity. He's a performance artist. You know, like, really gets into the character. And he's in a relationship with Jesus. Very spiritual," the female officer snorted. "And who are you?" Love, the burly one asked Trix, his tone softening slightly. "I'm his flatmate, Trix," she said, beaming. "I'm from California. I'm helping Benji, like, find himself. He's been through a lot. He was a hospital porter, you know. Saw a lot of trauma." She patted Benji's arm. "Didn't you, sweetie?" Benji could only offer a weak, pained smile. "So, you're saying Benji Eggles, known associates with several undesirable individuals, is now a teetotal, holier-than-thou performance artist under your guidance?" Exactly, Trix chirped. "He's turned over a new leaf. And I can vouch for him. He's been here, with me, every single night for the past, well, since I moved in, which was, like, ages ago. We're inseparable, officers. Just two peas in a pod. A very platonic pod, of course." She shot Benji a pointed look. Benji was mortified. Inseparable? Platonic? This was worse than being arrested. This was a public declaration of his perceived lack of sex appeal. The officers exchanged a look. Benji could see the doubt in their eyes, but also a flicker of professional weariness. They clearly didn't want to dig too deep into this bizarre domestic situation. "Right," the burly officer said, rubbing his temple. "Well, we've had a tip-off, so we have to ask. Mind if we have a little look around?" "Of course not," Trix declared, far too quickly. "Benji's got nothing to hide. Just art supplies. And a lot of unique smells that are totally normal for art." While the officers did a cursory, clearly unenthusiastic search, poking at a pile of clothes with a boot, glancing vaguely under the sofa where Benji's bin bag of shame lay, and wisely avoiding the artisanal vodka still, Trix maintained her bubbly, innocent facade. She even offered them a half-eaten biscuit. Eventually, the burly officer straightened up. "Right. Well, we'll be in touch, Mr. Eggles. But for now, consider this a friendly warning. We've got our eyes on you." He gave Benji a look that suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by the monk story. As they left, closing the now even more damaged door behind them, Benji slowly turned to Trix. "A monk? Relationship with Jesus? You just destroyed what little street cred I had left." Trix shrugged, picking a stray piece of glitter from her hair. "Relax, Benji. You're not going to jail. You're welcome." "Welcome? You've condemned me to a life of perpetual mockery among my peers. And you made me sound like I'm a permanent virgin." "Oh, come on, Benji. You are a permanent virgin. And you were going to jail. Consider it a trade-off. Besides," she added, a wicked grin spreading across her face, "it was totally worth it to see the look on your face. Pure, unadulterated chagrin." Benji groaned, slumping back against the wall. He had been saved, yes, but at what terrible cost to his dignity? His shame, however, was about to be put into stark relief by the events of the coming night. The evening descended with the familiar hum of the city, punctuated by the distant wail of sirens and the occasional drunken shout. Benji was attempting to patch up the door with duct tape and a fierce sense of indignation. Trix, despite having avoided a police interrogation for Benji, was now in a foul mood. One of her networking clients had proven to be stingy, and another had been overly enthusiastic about interpretive dance. "Honesty. Benji, did you have to use the last of the sticky tape on that?" Trix whined, gesturing at his pitiful repairs. "I needed it for my heels. They're like, totally falling apart from all the urban trekking." "It's a door, Trix. A fundamental barrier between us and the gaping maw of East London lunacy. Well, it's not working, is it? It still looks like a beaver chewed on it. Their bickering was a familiar soundtrack to their lives. A constant, low-level static. It was so constant, in fact, that neither of them initially registered the faint, rhythmic thump, 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 coming from the communal hallway. "Did you hear that?" Benji asked, pausing his duct taping. "Hear what?" "Your stomach rumbling," Trix replied, not looking up from her phone. The thumping grew louder, closer. It sounded heavy, deliberate, and then, a distinct clunk followed by a slow, ominous creak from their already compromised door. Benji and Trix both looked up, their eyes widening. The door, despite Benji's heroic efforts, was being pushed inwards. Slowly, menacingly, a figure emerged from the gloom of the hallway. Clad head to toe in black leather, shiny and form-fitting, it stood silhouetted against the dim light. A full gimp mask, complete with zippers and small eye holes, obscured its face. It was tall, broad-shouldered, and utterly silent. Benji let out a strangled gasp, dropping his roll of duct tape. "Right. Very funny. Trix. Barry from number 7 playing a prank again, is it? You tell him I still haven't forgotten about the oregano." The gimp took a slow, deliberate step into the flat, and then another. It held something in its gloved hand, a glint of metal. Benji's blood ran cold. This wasn't Barry. Barry was incapable of silence, and had a pathological fear of anything that required more effort than shouting. "Okay," Trix said, her voice now devoid of its usual sarcastic bite, a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes. "This isn't Barry, is this? One of your clients, Benji? Because if it is, you totally forgot to tell me about the uniform." Benji shook his head frantically. "No, I told you, I'm sexless. I don't have clients. This is a home invasion. We're being held hostage by a deranged rubber man." He pointed at the gimp, who had now fully entered the room and was surveying them with an unnerving stillness. The gimp raised the glinting object. It was a large, ornate butter knife. "A butter knife," Trix whispered, a hint of confusion in her voice. "That's underwhelming. It could be coated in poison," Benji wailed, scrambling backwards until his back hit the wall. "Or it could be a ceremonial butter knife. This is how horror films start. Trix, we're doomed." The gimp took another step, then another, slowly advancing on them. Benji could feel the cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. This was it. This was how his drug-addled, pointless life ended, at the hands of a silently menacing figure with a fetish for dairy cutlery. Trix, however, was starting to process the situation in her own unique way. She hadn't moved from the sofa, but her fear was slowly being replaced by something else. Curiosity, and perhaps, a tiny spark of intrigue. "So," Trix said, her voice surprisingly steady, "you're, like, a gimp. And you're breaking into our flat. Are you, like, a performance artist? Or are you, like, a really specific kind of burglar?" The gimp tilted its head slightly, the movement unnervingly human within the inhuman costume. It didn't speak. "This isn't a conversation, Trix," Benji hissed. "This is our final moments. He's going to tie us up and make us watch him eat all our hobnobs." Trix ignored him. Her gaze was fixed on the gimp, scanning its form. Her eyes lingered on the tight leather, the subtle curves beneath. A slow, almost imperceptible shift occurred in her posture. The fear in her eyes was replaced, not by courage, but by a different kind of hunger. "So," Trix continued, a slight smirk playing on her lips. "No talking? The strong, silent type, huh? I can respect that." She slowly, deliberately, ran her tongue over her lips. "This is going to be interesting." Benji gaped at her. "Interesting? Trix? He's a deranged butter knife wielding lunatic in a gimp suit. He's going to kill us." Trix winked at the gimp. "Or maybe," she purred, her voice dropping to a low, suggestive tone, "he's just looking for a little company." The gimp remained motionless, its head still tilted. Benji watched, horrified, as Trix slowly, sensuously, began to unbutton her shirt. "Trix, what are you doing?" Benji shrieked. "Benji," Trix replied, her eyes never leaving the gimp's impassive mask. "When life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. And when life gives you a deranged man in a gimp suit who's holding you hostage, you explore the possibilities." Benji watched, aghast, as Trix continued her slow, deliberate striptease. The gimp, however, showed no immediate reaction. It simply stood there, an inscrutable, shiny black statue. Are you sure this is the right approach? Trix, Benji stammered, his eyes darting between her and the motionless GIMP. Because, statistically, this usually ends with a newspaper headline and a very awkward post-mortem. Trix, now having shed her top to reveal a rather ornate, if slightly grubby, lace bra, finally looked at Benji. Benji, honey, everything is about intention. And my intention right now is to figure out what this guy wants. And if it happens to involve a little shared experience, then so be it. Besides, you're not exactly bursting with brilliant escape plans, are you? She had a point. Benji's current plan involved either fainting or attempting to reason with the GIMP about the economic impact of sudden death on the local Greg's economy. Trix then turned her full attention back to the GIMP. So, are we going to play a game? Truth or dare? Or something a little more hands-on? She took another step towards it, her movements fluid and confident. Because I'm really good at games, especially the ones where I win. The GIMP, for the first time, moved. It lowered the butter knife, slowly, deliberately, and then, it raised its other hand, revealing a small, black remote control. With a click, the lights in the flat dimmed, casting long, eerie shadows. Benji yelped. He's got a dimmer switch. He's a professional. This is terrifying. Trix, however, merely chuckled. Ooh, fancy. Going for atmosphere. Huh? I like it. She sashayed closer. So what's it gonna be, big boy? You want to tie me up? Or do you prefer to be the one on the receiving end? She winked. The GIMP's head tilted again. A silent, almost curious gesture. It made a soft, guttural sound. Not quite human. Not quite animal. He's communicating, Benji whispered excitedly, then clamped his hand over his mouth. He was horrified, yet utterly transfixed. Trix's smile widened. I think he likes me, Benji. And then, she continued her seduction. A bizarre ballet of come-ons and suggestive movements, all directed at a silent, leather-clad intruder holding them hostage. Benji watched, a mixture of repulsion and a strange, morbid fascination swirling within him. He was a captive audience to Trix's unique brand of crisis management. For the next hour, the flat became a stage for the most surreal hostage situation in Bethnal Green history. Benji was relegated to a silent, terrified witness, tied, with surprising gentleness, to a wobbly kitchen chair, his mouth taped shut. Trix's suggestion, just in case you scream and ruin the mood. Benji, from his vantage point, he observed Trix's tactical negotiations. It involved a lot of whispered commands, soft moans, and the occasional muffled sigh of profound satisfaction. The GIMP, it seemed, was less interested in robbing them and more interested in exploring. Trix, ever the entrepreneur, was apparently happy to facilitate this exploration, provided it met her own desperation and cash flow needs, although it wasn't clear what cash flow was involved in this exchange. At one point, the GIMP briefly paused its activities and silently pointed the butter knife at a jar of pickled onions. Benji tensed, convinced it was going to force-feed him. But Trix, without missing a beat, calmly offered, "You want a pickled onion, big fella?" "They're Benji's." The GIMP shook its head. Trix shrugged. "Suit yourself." Finally, as dawn began to paint the sky a weak, urban gray, the GIMP seemed to have reached its conclusion. It stood up, adjusted its mask, and gave Trix a little nod. Trix, looking disheveled but surprisingly content, blew it a kiss. That was surprisingly cathartic. Trix purred, stretching luxuriously. You know, he actually had some really interesting perspectives on the human condition. Very insightful. The GIMP then turned, gave Benji a long, silent stare that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken threats, and then, with a soft thud, slipped out through the broken door frame, disappearing into the waking city. Silence. Benji, still tied to the chair, blinked. He just left, he mumbled through the tape. Trix, after a moment, remembered him. Oh, right. Benji, you're still there. She casually untaped his mouth. Yeah, he just left. He was, like, totally sweet once you got to know him. Just a little, misunderstood, and a bit into, you know, the whole dominant submissive thing. Not in a bad way, though. Benji ripped the tape from his mouth. Not in a bad way. Trix, we were held hostage by a GIMP. And you seduced him. Trix shrugged, pulling on her crumpled top. Hey, it worked, didn't it? We're alive, no one's hurt, and I got some interesting new ideas for my next networking event. She winked. He was a good listener, too. Sometimes, you just need someone to really hear you. You know, Benji stared at her, then at the still open door, then at the lingering scent of leather and desperation. His flat, his life, had been invaded, violated, and then utterly redefined by Trix's unique brand of chaotic charm. He looked at Trix. She was rummaging in her bag, pulling out a crumpled 50-pound note. Here, she said, tossing it to him. For the door, or, you know, for your artisanal vodka supplies. Consider it a thank you. You were a surprisingly good audience. Benji caught the note. His brain, already fried, struggled to process this final absurdity. He had just endured the most terrifying, humiliating, and utterly bizarre night of his life, and he was being paid for it by his flatmate, who had, in turn, gotten off on it. He sighed, pushing himself up from the chair. His life was a circus, and he was the unwilling clown. But, he mused, as he looked at the money in his hand, at least he could now afford a truly glorious, mind-numbing oblivion. And maybe, just maybe, enough duct tape to build a fort. The sun was fully up now, mocking the squalor with its bright light. Benji looked around the flat, no longer his sanctuary, but a battleground permanently scarred by its new occupant. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the gimp was just the beginning. You're a menace, Trix, he muttered, shaking his head. Trix grinned, already scrolling through her phone, probably lining up her next networking event. I know, Benji, but at least I'm not boring. And hey, she added, at least you finally got some action in this flat, even if it was, like, super vicarious.
Marshmallow.